The morning sun had barely risen over the city when Derek pulled his silver Mercedes into his reserved parking spot at Premier Motors. The spot with his name on it. The spot he'd earned after 8 years of being the absolute best at what he did. Derek wasn't just good at selling luxury cars. He was a legend. At least that's what he told himself every morning when he straightened his tie in the rearview mirror. And honestly, the numbers backed him up. For 8 straight years, he'd been the top salesman at this dealership. Not just by a little bit either. He outsold the second-place guy by almost double most months. His commission checks were fat. Really fat. Between his base salary and bonuses, Derek was pulling in about $150,000 a year. In a business where most salespeople struggled to break 60 grand, he was living the dream. New cars every year, a beautiful house in the suburbs, country club membership, the whole package. Walking through those glass doors every day felt like coming home. Derek knew every inch of this showroom floor. He knew which overhead lights flickered slightly. He knew the exact spot where the afternoon sun created the perfect gleam on the red sports cars. He knew the coffee machine's quirks and which button to press twice to get the strongest brew. More importantly, he knew the customers. Or at least he knew how to read them. The way they dressed, the watch they wore, how they walked through the door. Within 30 seconds, Derek could usually tell you how much money someone had and exactly which car they'd drive off the lot. It was like a superpower, and he'd spent years perfecting it. The other salespeople? They respected him. Some were probably jealous, sure, but they all knew Derek was the guy who made things happen. When there was a tough customer, they'd sometimes step back and let Derek work his magic. When corporate visited, they always wanted to meet Derek first. He'd even helped train some of the newer folks, though he'd never admit he enjoyed that part. The previous general manager, old Bill Harrison, had been at Premier Motors for 20 years. Bill pretty much let Derek do his own thing. They had an understanding. Derek brought in the money and Bill didn't micromanage him. It was a perfect setup. They'd grab lunch sometimes, talk about sports, maybe hit the golf course on slow Saturdays. But 3 weeks ago, Bill announced his retirement. 65 years old, time to travel with the wife, play with the grandkids, all that stuff. Derek had taken him out for drinks on his last day. They'd laughed about old times, crazy customers, deals that almost fell through but didn't. As they'd sat at the bar that night, Bill had leaned over and said something that stuck with Derek. "You know, you basically run this place already. Whoever they bring in, just remember that. You're the backbone here." Derek had nodded, feeling that familiar surge of pride. Bill was right. The sales floor was his domain. He'd built relationships with some of the wealthiest people in the city. They came back year after year, sometimes sending their friends and family too. His client list read like a who's who of local business owners, doctors, lawyers, and executives. Sure, there had been some complaints over the years. A few customers saying he was too pushy or aggressive. But Derek saw those as badges of honor, really. You don't make the kind of sales numbers he made by being soft. Sometimes you had to push. Sometimes you had to be persistent. That's just how the business worked. The customer satisfaction surveys, Derek didn't pay much attention to those. They were just corporate nonsense, boxes to check. What mattered was closing deals and moving inventory. Everything else was just fluff designed to make the corporate office feel important. When the email came through 2 Fridays ago, Derek was in the middle of closing a deal on a fully loaded SUV. He barely glanced at his phone. Something about a new general manager starting soon. Her name was listed, some credentials mentioned, but Derek was focused on his customer. He'd read it later, or not. Did it really matter? Over the weekend, a few coworkers had texted him about it. Did you see who they hired? One message read. Another said, "Big changes coming, I guess." Derek had replied with shrugging emojis. Changes? Doubtful. The sales floor operated like a well-oiled machine, and he was the engine. Monday morning came, and there was more buzz around the office. The new general manager would be starting her first official day. Derek learned her name was Ms. Washington. Apparently, she'd worked at 3 other dealerships before this one. Corporate had hired her specifically to revitalize operations, whatever that meant. Derek had seen managers come and go over the years. Some lasted a few months, some a few years. They'd show up with their fancy ideas and corporate training, try to implement new systems, and then eventually realize that the old way worked just fine. The sales team would smile, nod, do the minimum required, and then get back to business as usual once the new manager stopped paying attention. He figured this would be no different. New manager comes in, wants to make her mark, changes a few things that don't matter, and then settles into the routine. Give it 3 months, maybe 6, and everything would be back to normal. That first week, Ms. Washington mostly observed. She'd walk around the showroom with a tablet taking notes. She'd sit in on sales calls, watch how different team members interacted with customers. She scheduled one-on-one meetings with everyone, including Derek. His meeting was on Wednesday afternoon. They sat in her new office, the same space where Bill used to keep his golf clubs and photos of his fishing trips. Now it was neat, organized, with a bookshelf full of automotive industry books and management guides. Ms. Washington had asked him about his approach to sales, his customer relationships, his goals. Derek had given her his usual spiel: 8 years of being number one, his impressive client roster, his ability to close deals others couldn't. He'd expected her to be impressed. She'd smiled politely, thanked him for his time, and said she looked forward to working with him. Something about that meeting felt off, though. The way she'd flipped through papers while he talked, the questions she'd asked about customer follow-up and satisfaction ratings, the way she'd paused when he mentioned his aggressive closing techniques. But Derek shrugged it off. She was new. She'd learn how things worked around here soon enough. By Friday, there would be a mandatory team meeting. The new boss wanted to address everyone together, talk about her vision for the dealership. Derek planned to sit in the back, maybe check his phone if it got boring. He had a big sale brewing for next week, a corporate fleet deal that could net him a massive commission. That's what he needed to focus on, not some meeting where a new manager would talk about teamwork and corporate values. He had no idea that this meeting would change everything. That by the end of the week his whole world would be turned upside down. That his confidence, his pride, and his belief that he was untouchable would all come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. Sometimes the biggest falls come when you're standing on top of the mountain, convinced nothing can knock you down. Friday afternoon rolled around faster than Derek expected. All week he'd been crushing it on the sales floor. 2 luxury sedans sold on Tuesday, a sports car on Wednesday, and he had 3 hot leads lined up for the following week. Everything was going exactly as it always did. The team meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the main conference room. Derek finished up a phone call with a client and strolled in about 5 minutes late. Not because he was trying to make a statement, but because that's just how he operated. Meetings were never as important as actual sales. Most of the staff were already seated. The finance guys, the service department managers, the other salespeople, even some of the detailing crew. Ms. Washington stood at the front of the room next to a large screen, her laptop connected and ready to go. She glanced at Derek as he walked in but didn't say anything about his tardiness. Derek grabbed a chair near the back, settling in next to Tom, one of the other senior salespeople. Tom gave him a quick nod. They'd worked together for years, had a mutual respect thing going on. Though Tom never quite hit Derek's numbers, he was solid. Ms. Washington started the meeting by thanking everyone for their hard work. She talked about how impressed she'd been with the operation overall, how the dealership had a strong reputation in the community. Standard new manager stuff. Derek pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails under the table. Then she switched gears. The screen behind her lit up with graphs and charts. Customer satisfaction scores over the past 2 years. Derek glanced up briefly. The numbers were trending downward. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. What I've observed this week, Ms. Washington said, clicking to the next slide, is that while we're moving inventory, we're losing something critical. Repeat customers, referrals, long-term relationships. Derek felt a tiny pinch of annoyance. He had plenty of repeat customers. His regulars came back like clockwork every 2 or 3 years. The next slide showed more data. Customer complaint reports, negative online reviews, survey responses. Some of the comments were brutal. Felt pressured. Salesperson wouldn't listen to what I wanted. Would never recommend to friends. Now, I'm not here to point fingers, Ms. Washington continued, her voice steady and professional, but we need to acknowledge that our approach needs updating. The car buying experience has changed. Customers today do their research online. They know what they want before they walk in. They value transparency and respect. Derek couldn't help himself. He let out a small laugh, barely audible but loud enough that a few people turned around. Ms. Washington's eyes found him in the back row. Something funny, Derek? she asked, not aggressively but directly. He shrugged. Just thinking that maybe the problem isn't how we sell. Maybe it's that some customers don't understand how the business works. A few uncomfortable glances were exchanged around the room. Ms. Washington nodded slowly, as if considering his point. That's an interesting perspective, she said. But here's what the data tells us. We're down 18% in customer retention over 2 years. Our online rating has dropped from 4.2 stars to 3.6, and we've had 12 formal complaints filed in the past year alone. That's not customers not understanding the business. That's us not understanding our customers. Derek felt his jaw tighten. Was she seriously lecturing him? The guy who'd been carrying this dealership on his back for nearly a decade. Ms. Washington clicked to another slide. Moving forward, we're implementing new protocols. Every customer interaction will prioritize their needs first. No more aggressive upselling tactics. No more pressuring people into deals they're not comfortable with. We're going to focus on building trust, she went on, explaining new training programs, revised sales processes, mandatory customer follow-ups. With each point, Derek felt his irritation growing. This was exactly what he'd predicted. New manager shows up, tries to fix things that aren't broken, makes everyone's job harder. When she mentioned that sales staff would now be evaluated partly on customer satisfaction scores, not just sales numbers, Derek had heard enough. He leaned back in his chair, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. You know what? He said, his voice cutting through her presentation. Maybe corporate should have hired someone who actually understands how this specific dealership works instead of bringing in somebody to tell us how to do jobs we've been doing successfully for years. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Several people stared at Derek with wide eyes. Tom next to him shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his hands. Ms. Washington paused, her hand still on the laptop. She turned to face Derek fully, her expression calm but serious. Derek, I appreciate your passion for your work, she said evenly. But if you have concerns about the new direction, I'm happy to discuss them with you professionally. Would you like to elaborate on your specific concerns? It was a perfectly reasonable response. Measured, professional, opening the door for actual dialogue. But Derek was already too far into his feelings to back down now. In his mind, he was standing up for himself, for the team, for the way things should be done. He stood up, crossing his arms. My specific concern is that I've been here for 8 years. I've outsold everyone in this room combined over that time. My numbers speak for themselves. I don't need someone like you who just walked in the door a week ago telling me how to sell cars. There it was. Hanging in the air. Someone like you. The moment those words left his mouth, Derek saw it. The slight change in Ms. Washington's expression. Not anger, but something else. Recognition, maybe. Disappointment. Several other employees exchanged glances that said they'd caught it too. The weight behind those words. The implication. Ms. Washington took a slow breath. I see. And what exactly do you mean by someone like me, Derek? He realized his mistake too late. He tried to backtrack. I just mean someone new. Someone who hasn't been here long enough to understand our culture. But the damage was done. Everyone in that room knew what it sounded like. What it felt like. The disrespect wasn't just about her being new. There was something deeper, something uglier underneath his words. I understand you're frustrated, Ms. Washington said, her voice still controlled but firmer now. But let me be very clear. I was hired by corporate specifically because of my 15 years of experience in this industry. I've turned around 3 underperforming dealerships. I have an MBA in business management, and I've sold more cars in my career than you've probably even talked to customers about. My qualifications aren't up for debate. What is up for debate, however, is whether you can speak to your manager with respect. Derek felt heat rising in his face. She'd just put him in his place in front of everyone. His pride couldn't handle it. Respect goes both ways, he shot back. And I bring in more revenue to this place than anyone. The owners know what I'm worth. You're just here temporarily, but I'm the foundation of this dealership. Without me, this place would fall apart. Ms. Washington closed her laptop. This meeting is adjourned. Everyone except Derek, you're dismissed. Derek, my office now. People filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact with both of them. Tom patted Derek's shoulder as he passed, a gesture that felt more like sympathy than support. Within a minute, the conference room was empty except for Derek and Ms. Washington. After you, she said, gesturing toward the door. Derek's heart was pounding. Part of him knew he'd crossed a line. But another part, the proud part, the part that had been fed by 8 years of being the best, refused to back down. He'd go to her office. He'd say what needed to be said. And by Monday, he was convinced corporate would sort this whole thing out. He had no idea just how wrong he was about to be. The walk from the conference room to Ms. Washington's office felt longer than it actually was. Derek could feel eyes on him from the sales floor as they passed through. His coworkers pretended to be busy with paperwork or on their computers, but he knew they were all wondering what was about to happen. Ms. Washington held the door open, waiting for him to enter first. He walked in, that same office that used to be Bill's, and stood near the desk. He didn't sit down. Standing felt like keeping some kind of power in the situation. She closed the door behind them and moved to her chair, sitting down calmly. She pulled out a notepad and pen, then looked up at him. "Have a seat, Derek. I'd rather stand." That wasn't a request. "Sit down." Something in her tone made it clear this wasn't a casual conversation anymore. Derek reluctantly dropped into one of the chairs across from her desk, his arms still crossed defensively. Ms. Washington clicked her pen, making a note on her pad. "Let's talk about what just happened in that meeting. You interrupted a company presentation, undermined my authority in front of the entire staff, and made what sounded like a personally disrespectful comment. Do you want to explain yourself?" Derek leaned back, trying to project confidence he was starting not to feel. "I was just being honest. Everyone in that room was thinking the same thing. They're just too afraid to say it." "Really? And what exactly were they all thinking?" "That these new policies are going to make our jobs harder. That the old way was working fine. That maybe corporate made a mistake bringing in someone who doesn't understand how we operate here." Ms. Washington wrote something else down. "I see, and the someone like you comment. What did you mean by that?" Derek felt a flash of panic. He knew how it had sounded, but he couldn't admit that now. "I meant someone new to the dealership." "That's all? That's all?" She repeated it flatly, clearly not buying it. "Derek, I've been in this industry long enough to recognize disrespect when I see it. What happened in that meeting wasn't just a disagreement about policy. You challenged my qualifications, my authority, and you did it in a way that was deliberately demeaning." "I was just stating facts," Derek said, his voice rising slightly. "I do bring in the most revenue. That's not an opinion, that's numbers. And yeah, I've been here longer than you. Also facts." "You're absolutely right about your sales numbers," Ms. Washington said, her tone measured. "But here's what you seem to be missing. Sales numbers don't give you the right to disrespect management. They don't give you the right to undermine company initiatives, and they certainly don't give you the right to speak to anyone the way you just spoke to me." Derek felt his anger bubbling up again. Who was she to tell him what he could and couldn't say? He'd earned his position here. He'd built this place up with his own 2 hands, his own hustle, his own talent. "Look," he said, uncrossing his arms and leaning forward. "I think you're taking this the wrong way. I'm passionate about this dealership. Maybe I came on a little strong, but that's because I care. I don't want to see this place go downhill because of some new corporate strategy that sounds good on paper, but doesn't work in reality." Ms. Washington set down her pen. "Derek, do you know why I was hired? Corporate wanted to shake things up, I guess." "I was hired because this dealership's performance has been declining for 2 years. Revenue is up slightly, yes, mainly because of your individual sales, but overall profitability is down. Customer retention is terrible. Online reputation is tanking. The service department is underperforming because customers who buy here don't come back for maintenance. Do you understand what that means?" Derek stayed quiet, his jaw tight. "It means that while you're closing deals, you're not building the kind of customer relationships that keep a dealership sustainable long-term. You're treating this like you're the only thing that matters when really, you're part of a much bigger operation. And your attitude, your approach, it's actually hurting us in ways you can't even see." "That's ridiculous," Derek snapped. "My customers love me. I have people who've bought 5-6 cars from me over the years. You have some loyal customers, yes, but you also have the highest complaint rate of anyone on the sales team. Did you know that? In the past 18 months, you've had 9 formal complaints filed. 9. The next highest person has 2. Derek felt like he'd been punched. "That's because I deal with the difficult customers. The big spenders. They're more demanding. Or maybe it's because your approach needs adjustment," Ms. Washington countered. "And instead of being open to feedback, You're defensive and dismissive. Like you were in that meeting. Derek stood up abruptly. You know what? I don't have to sit here and listen to this. I've been nothing but an asset to this company. If you can't see that, that's your problem, not mine. Sit down, Derek, we're not done. Yeah, we are. He moved toward the door. I'm going home. We can pick this up on Monday when you've had time to cool off and think about what you're really saying here. If you walk out that door right now, you're making a serious mistake. Derek's hand was on the doorknob. He paused, looking back at her. Is that a threat? It's a warning. As your manager, I'm telling you that walking out of this conversation is insubordination. On top of what happened in the meeting, it's going to have consequences. He laughed. Actually laughed. Consequences? What are you going to do, fire me? Good luck with that. The owners know what I bring to this table. They're not going to let you get rid of their top earner because your feelings got hurt. Something flickered across Ms. Washington's face. Not anger, but something colder. Resolve, maybe. This isn't about my feelings, Derek. This is about your behavior. About your refusal to be a team player. About the way you spoke to me, not just now, but in front of the entire staff. Derek's pride was in full control now. All the logic, all the little warning bells in his head telling him to stop, to apologize, to walk this back, they were all drowned out by his ego. You want to know the truth? He said, his voice getting louder. Fine, here's the truth. Corporate hired you as a diversity hire. They wanted to check a box, look progressive, show they're all about inclusion and whatever else is trendy right now, but you don't actually have what it takes to run a dealership like this. You might have done okay at some struggling places that were already failing, but here, you're out of your league. The words hung in the air like poison. Ms. Washington's expression didn't change, but she picked up her pen again and wrote something down. A lot of something. Her hand moved quickly across the page. And another thing, Derek continued, on a roll now, unable to stop himself. This whole woke corporate culture thing, it's killing businesses. It's why America is going downhill. Companies used to hire the best person for the job. Now they hire based on what someone looks like instead of what they can actually do. And everyone's too scared to say it because they'll get canceled or whatever. But I'm not scared. Someone needs to tell the truth around here. Ms. Washington finished writing and looked up at him. Her face was completely calm, which somehow made the moment even more unsettling. Are you finished? She asked quietly. Derek realized suddenly and terribly that he'd gone too far. Way too far. But his pride wouldn't let him back down now. Yeah, I'm finished. I'm going home. See you Monday. Or maybe I won't if you try something stupid. We'll see what corporate has to say about all this. He yanked open the door and walked out, his heart pounding in his chest. As he strode through the sales floor toward the exit, he could feel everyone's eyes on him again. But this time it felt different. Not curious, something else. Something that made his stomach turn. Behind him in her office, Ms. Washington was already picking up her phone, dialing HR. Outside the door, another manager stood frozen, having heard everything through the thin walls. The witness Derek didn't even know was there. Derek barely remembered the drive home. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight, his mind racing through everything that had just happened. Part of him felt justified, like he'd finally stood up for himself and said what needed to be said. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, kept whispering that he'd made a terrible mistake. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the car for a minute, staring at his house. His wife's car was there. She'd want to know why he was home early. What was he going to tell her? The weekend was torture. Derek tried to act normal, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying Friday afternoon. Saturday morning, he sent a text to Tom asking if he'd heard anything. Tom replied hours later with just, "Not really, man. Probably best to let it cool down." That response didn't sit right. Tom was usually more chatty, more supportive. The short, careful answer felt like distance, like Tom was backing away from him. Derek spent Saturday afternoon texting other co-workers, trying to gauge the situation, trying to build support. Most didn't respond at all. One guy, Kevin from finance, replied with, "Dude, what were you thinking?" And nothing else. By Sunday evening, Derek had convinced himself everything would be fine. Corporate would hear his side. They'd see his sales records. Ms. Washington was new, probably on some kind of probation period herself. They'd tell her to ease up, maybe move her to a different location. By Wednesday, this would all blow over. He'd keep his head down for a bit, hit his sales targets, and things would go back to normal. Maybe he'd even get an apology. Monday morning, Derek's phone rang at 8:30. He was getting ready for work, adjusting his tie in the mirror. The number showed the dealership's main line. "Derek, this is Patricia from HR. We need you to come in this morning, but don't report to the sales floor. Come directly to the administrative building, conference room B. Can you be here by 10? His stomach dropped. "What's this about?" "We'll discuss everything when you arrive." 10 o'clock, conference room B. She hung up before he could ask anything else. Derek stared at his phone. HR, that wasn't good. But maybe they just wanted his side of the story. Maybe Ms. Washington had filed some kind of complaint, and they needed to hear both perspectives. He could explain everything. Make them understand. He showed up at 9:45, not wanting to be late for this. The administrative building was separate from the main dealership, a smaller office where corporate stuff happened. He'd only been inside a handful of times over the years. Patricia met him in the lobby. She was in her 50s, professional, someone he'd maybe spoken to twice in 8 years. "Derek, thanks for coming. Right this way." She led him down a hallway to conference room B. When she opened the door, Derek's confidence evaporated instantly. There were 4 people sitting at the table. Patricia took a seat. Next to her was someone Derek didn't recognize, a woman in a sharp business suit with a folder in front of her. Across from them was Richard Caldwell, the regional vice president. Derek had met him maybe 3 times, and at the head of the table sat Ms. Washington, her expression unreadable. "Derek, have a seat," Richard said, gesturing to the empty chair. Derek sat down slowly, looking at each face. This wasn't a conversation. This was something else entirely. The woman in the suit spoke first. "Derek, I'm Michelle Chen, Senior HR Director from corporate headquarters. I drove in this morning specifically to meet with you. Do you know why we've asked you here?" He swallowed hard. "I'm guessing it's about Friday." "That's correct. We've received a detailed incident report from Ms. Washington regarding your behavior during the staff meeting and subsequent conversation in her office. We've also interviewed several witnesses and reviewed relevant documentation. Before we proceed, I want to make sure you understand this is a formal investigation. Do you have any questions before we begin?" Derek's mouth felt dry. "Am I being fired?" "We're here to review the facts and determine appropriate action," Michelle said carefully. "Let's start with the staff meeting on Friday. Multiple employees have confirmed that you interrupted Ms. Washington's presentation, made dismissive comments about her authority, and used the phrase "someone like you" when referring to her. Is that accurate?" "I was expressing my opinion about the new policies," Derek said, his voice shaky now. "I have a right to disagree." "You absolutely have a right to disagree," Richard interjected. "What you don't have a right to do is disrespect management in front of staff. That's insubordination. But let's continue." Michelle opened her folder, pulling out papers. "After the meeting, you met with Ms. Washington in her office. Can you tell us what happened during that conversation?" Derek's mind raced. What had he said? What had that other manager heard? "We had a disagreement. Things got heated. I might have raised my voice." "Did you or did you not call Ms. Washington a diversity hire?" Michelle asked directly. The room felt like it was closing in. I may have said something about corporate hiring practices in general." "That's not what I asked. Did you specifically tell Ms. Washington that she was hired as a diversity hire and not based on her qualifications?" Derek looked at Ms. Washington. Her face remained neutral, professional, not angry, not smug, just watching him. "I was frustrated," Derek said quietly. "I said some things I shouldn't have." Michelle pulled out another document. "We have a witness statement from another manager who was outside the office. He heard you clearly through the door. Would you like me to read what he reported?" Derek felt sick. "No, I apologize. I was out of line. It won't happen again." "Let me be very clear about what was reported," Michelle continued. "You told Ms. Washington she was a diversity hire. You said the company hired her to check a box and look progressive. You questioned her qualifications and suggested she couldn't actually do the job. You made statements about woke corporate culture and said companies should hire based on merit, implying that Ms. Washington wasn't hired based on merit. Is this accurate? Derek's hands were shaking now. Hearing it all laid out like that in the cold light of this conference room, it sounded so much worse than it had felt in the moment. I was upset. I didn't mean it the way it sounds. Richard leaned forward. Derek, I'm going to be straight with you. This isn't just about a disagreement or even insubordination. What you said creates a hostile work environment. It's discriminatory. It exposes this company to serious legal liability. But I've been here 8 years, Derek said, desperation creeping into his voice. My sales record, I'm the top earner. That has to count for something. Michelle pulled out yet another document. Let's talk about your performance record. Your sales numbers are strong, yes. But did you know you have 9 formal customer complaints filed in the past 18 months? 9 complaints about aggressive sales tactics, not listening to customer needs, and in 2 cases, making customers feel uncomfortable or pressured. Derek stared at the paper she slid across the table. He'd never seen this before. 9 complaints, the dates, the details, comments from customers saying they'd never return, that they'd warn others about him. I didn't know about all of these, he stammered. Previous management didn't address them properly, Richard admitted. That's on us, but Ms. Washington brought them to our attention as part of her initial assessment. Your sales numbers have been masking a serious problem with customer relations. Combined with what happened Friday, we have to take action. Patricia spoke up for the first time. Derek, we also reviewed company policy regarding workplace conduct, harassment, and discrimination. What you said to Ms. Washington violates multiple policies. This isn't something we can overlook. I'll apologize, Derek said quickly. I'll apologize to everyone. I'll take whatever training you want. I'll follow the new protocols. Just give me another chance. The room was quiet for a long moment. Michelle and Richard exchanged glances. Ms. Washington remained still, her hands folded on the table. Finally, Richard spoke. Derek, we've consulted with our legal team. Given the severity of the situation, we're prepared to offer you 2 options. Option 1, you resign immediately. We'll give you 2 weeks of severance pay and the incident won't be detailed in your employment record. We'll confirm dates of employment only if anyone calls for a reference. Derek's world was crumbling. And option 2? Option 2, we terminate you for cause. For insubordination, creating a hostile work environment, and violation of company conduct policies. No severance. The full details go in your permanent record. Any future employer who does a thorough background check will likely find out why you were terminated. This is insane, Derek whispered. Over one argument? One bad day? This isn't about one bad day. Ms. Washington spoke for the first time, her voice calm but firm. This is about a pattern of behavior that was ignored for too long. This is about you making discriminatory statements and refusing to take accountability. This is about you creating an environment where other employees feel uncomfortable and customers feel disrespected. Derek looked around the table. 4 faces all watching him, all waiting for his decision. His career, his reputation, his $150,000 a year job, all of it disappearing because he couldn't control his pride for one afternoon. How long do I have to decide? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We need an answer today, Michelle said. By 5 o'clock. They left him alone in the conference room to think. 30 minutes later, Derek walked back to Patricia's office and told her he'd resign. He couldn't risk option 2. He couldn't risk future employers finding out the real reason he'd been fired. He cleaned out his desk that afternoon while everyone else was at lunch. Nobody said goodbye. 1 month after Derek walked out of Premier Motors for the last time, he sat in his home office staring at his laptop screen. Job search websites were open in multiple tabs. He'd applied to 17 dealerships in the past 3 weeks. So far, he'd gotten 3 responses, all rejections. The severance pay had helped cushion the blow initially, but it was gone now. His wife had been supportive at first until she realized this wasn't just a temporary setback. The mortgage payment was due in a week. The car payments, the country club membership he still hadn't canceled. All those expenses that seemed so manageable when he was pulling in $150,000 a year. He'd told his wife it was a corporate restructuring, that they'd eliminated his position. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth, not yet. But she was getting suspicious. She'd asked why none of his old coworkers were calling, why he seemed so anxious every time his phone rang. Derek clicked on another job posting. Sales manager position at a dealership 40 minutes away. Decent salary, but nowhere near what he used to make. 70,000 base plus commission. He started filling out the application, getting to the dreaded question he'd seen on every single one. Reason for leaving last position. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could he say that wasn't a lie but wouldn't raise red flags? Seeking new opportunities. That's what he'd been writing. Vague enough to get past the initial screening, but he knew it wouldn't hold up once they started digging. The phone rang. Unknown number. Derek answered it anyway, hoping it might be a callback from one of his applications. Is this Derek Patterson? Yes, speaking. Hi, Derek, this is Jennifer from Luxury Auto Group. We received your application for our senior sales position. I wanted to schedule a phone interview if you're still interested. Derek's heart jumped. Finally, some good news. Absolutely, yes. I'm very interested. Great. Before we schedule anything, I just need to ask a quick question. I spoke with Premier Motors to verify your employment. They confirmed your dates but wouldn't provide any additional information. That's unusual. Is there anything you'd like to tell me about why you left? Derek's mouth went dry. Here it was. The moment he'd been dreading. It was a management change. The new leadership wanted to go in a different direction. There was a pause on the other end. I see, and you left voluntarily? Yes, it was a mutual decision that it was time for me to move on. Another pause, longer this time. Derek, I appreciate your time, but I'm going to be honest with you. When an employer only confirms dates and nothing else, that's usually a red flag. Combined with your sales record, which I can see was impressive, it doesn't add up. I think we're going to pass on moving forward. I wish you the best in your search. Click. She hung up before he could respond. Derek put his head in his hands. This was the third interview that had ended the same way. They'd see his numbers, get excited, then make that call to Premier Motors and get the neutral reference that screamed, "There's a problem here." Nobody wanted to hire someone with that kind of baggage, no matter how good their sales record looked on paper. Meanwhile, back at Premier Motors, things were changing fast. Ms. Washington had wasted no time implementing her new systems. The first thing she did was promote Casey, one of the younger salespeople who'd been working there for 3 years. Casey had decent numbers, but more importantly, he had the best customer satisfaction scores on the team. At first, some of the older guys grumbled about it. A kid with 3 years of experience getting promoted? But Ms. Washington had been clear in her announcement. We're building a culture where how you treat people matters as much as how many cars you sell. Casey represents that culture. She started weekly training sessions. Not boring corporate lectures, but actually useful stuff. How to read customer signals better. How to build long-term relationships instead of just chasing one-time sales. How to use social media and online reviews to generate referrals. Some of the staff were resistant at first, but the results started speaking for themselves. Within 6 weeks, customer satisfaction scores had jumped by 12%. Online reviews started trending positive. People were actually reading the new 5-star reviews and mentioning them when they came in. I saw you guys were turning things around, one customer told Casey. That's why I came here instead of the place across town. The service department saw an increase too. Customers who bought cars were actually coming back for maintenance instead of going to independent shops. That meant more revenue from parts and service, which had always been underperforming. Tom, Derek's old friend, found himself actually enjoying work more. The pressure to push customers into deals they weren't ready for was gone. He could take his time, build real relationships, and still hit his numbers. His commission checks were slightly smaller than before, but his stress level had dropped dramatically. One afternoon, about 2 months after Derek left, Tom was having lunch with Casey in the break room. They were talking about the changes when Casey brought up the incident. "Can I ask you something?" Casey said. "You were pretty tight with Derek. Did you see that coming? What happened with him and Ms. Washington?" Tom set down his sandwich, thinking about how to answer. "Honestly? Yeah, I kinda did. Derek was always a little too confident, you know, like he thought the rules didn't apply to him, because his numbers were good. I tried to hint at it a few times over the years, but he wasn't the kind of guy who took feedback well. It's just crazy, though," Casey said, "to throw away a job like that over ego." "That's the thing about ego," Tom replied. "It blinds you. Derek couldn't see that his way of doing things was actually hurting us in the long run. He couldn't see that times were changing. And when someone tried to show him, he took it as a personal attack instead of an opportunity to grow. 3 months after leaving Premier Motors, Derek finally got a job offer. A small dealership on the other side of the city, family-owned, mostly used cars. The salary was $65,000, less than half what he used to make. No fancy office, no reserved parking spot, no country club conversations with wealthy clients. His first day was humbling. The showroom was a fraction of the size of Premier Motors. The cars were older models, practical vehicles for practical people. His co-workers were nice enough, but they weren't impressed by his resume. If anything, they seemed skeptical about why someone with his experience would be working there. Derek's new manager, an older guy named Frank who'd owned the place for 30 years, pulled him aside during lunch. "Listen, I'm going to be straight with you," Frank said. "I know you came from Premier Motors. I know you had good numbers there. But whatever happened that made you leave, whatever bad habits you picked up, they don't fly here. I run a clean operation. We treat customers right. We treat each other with respect. You do that, we'll get along fine. You don't, and you'll be looking for another job. We clear?" Derek nodded, his pride swallowing itself. "We're clear." That night, Derek finally told his wife the truth. Not all of it, but enough. That he'd had a conflict with management. That he'd said things he regretted. That he'd lost his job because of his own actions, not because of corporate restructuring. She was quiet for a long time after he finished talking. Finally, she asked, "What did you say to her? What could have been bad enough to lose everything?" Derek couldn't look at her. "Things I can't take back. Things I'm ashamed of." The months that followed were a slow rebuild. Derek worked at the small dealership, kept his head down, followed the rules. His numbers were okay, not spectacular. He made his mortgage payments, barely. They canceled the country club membership, cut back on everything they could. 6 months in, he ran into Casey at a coffee shop. They talked awkwardly for a few minutes. Casey mentioned that Premier Motors had just had their best quarter in 5 years. That Ms. Washington had been promoted to oversee 2 other dealerships in the region. That everyone was actually happy to come to work now. After Casey left, Derek sat alone with his coffee, thinking about what his life might look like if he'd just stayed quiet that day. If he'd listened instead of talked. If he'd shown respect instead of demanding it. If he'd valued being a good person as much as he'd valued being the top salesman. That evening, Derek did something he'd been avoiding for months. He wrote an email. Not to Ms. Washington directly. He didn't have the right to contact her. But to Tom, asking him to pass along a message if he felt it was appropriate. The message was simple. I was wrong. About everything. I'm sorry for the way I acted and the things I said. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now why I lost that job. It wasn't about sales numbers or corporate politics. It was about character, and I failed that test completely. Tom never responded to say whether he'd passed it along. Derek didn't expect him to. But writing it felt like the first honest thing he'd done since that Friday afternoon, when his world fell apart. A year after leaving Premier Motors, Derek was still at the small dealership, still making a fraction of what he used to earn. But something had changed. He listened to customers more. He cared about their experience, not just the commission. When younger salespeople asked for advice, he told them about his mistakes, about what happens when ego becomes more important than integrity. His old life was gone. The big house, the luxury car, the status, all of it. What he had now was humbler, harder, but in a strange way more honest. He'd learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Respect isn't something you demand because of your position or your performance. It's something you earn through how you treat people, every single day, regardless of who they are or what title they have. Some lessons you can only learn the hard way, and Derek's way had cost him everything.